host, Matt Carrolley. Tonight we are back at it to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to be talking quite a bit about this most recent preseason game against the New York Jets. We're going to be talking about their upcoming matchup against the Washington Redskins. And of course, we'll be answering your mailbag questions. As usual, we start off the show getting looking back towards any roster moves and any major changes to the Falcons that have occurred over the last week. And of course, we have some of those moves for you. The Falcons made a couple of additions since our last episode. They claimed quarterback / wide receiver Danny Etling, formerly of the Patriots, off waivers. And they also signed cornerback Jalen Myrick, released Stephon Anthony in order to create that roster spot. Matt, thoughts on the Etling signing and the Myrick signing, particularly given the fact that our good friend Jason Butt from The Athletic talked about how the Falcons were very interested in Etling heading into the 2018 draft and were looking to potentially sign him as an undrafted free agent, but he wound up getting selected in the 7th round by the Patriots. And, I heard Dan Quinn mention sort of that Etling was a guy that they became very interested in at the LSU Pro Day when they were scouting out Russell Gage, and they thought Etling performed well, and then that sort of got him on their radar. Thoughts on that move?
Yeah, I think developmental quarterback is something that they were interested in just based on the fact that, Ben Kirk was a guy that they aggressively pursued in the undrafted free agency process last year. And with him going down, I think they wanted to have someone in that spot. I don't necessarily think he's a guy that's, going to make the team on the 53-man roster. I think at this point with Ben Kirk going down, he was really the only competition for Matt Schaub at this point. So I think the Falcons are locked in with Ryan and Schaub as their two quarterbacks going into 2019. But a guy that, again, is an athletic player, given that he bounced around in a couple positions at his first stop in New England. And, the scout team's a big part of, the regular season process as far as preparing for opponents. And, a guy like Danny Etling could potentially be cast in that Taysom Hill role to help the Falcons, better game plan for the Saints. So, again, a guy that I think will eventually wind up on the team's practice squad and hopefully can remain there for the duration of the season. And, again, can be used to help the Falcons game plan for various opponents. So yeah, credit to Jason Butt being the first on that, kind of preparing us for this move. And then it eventually, came to fruition on Wednesday with the Falcons placing a waiver claim on him. As far as Jalen Myrick being signed and Stephon Anthony being released, to Stephon Anthony, it didn't take long for him to bounce on his feet. The Jets ended up signing him today. But I think the Myrick signing is more due to the fact that the Falcons had 2 injuries at cornerback in this past week's game, which we'll get into in a moment. But with, DeMonte Casey and Kendall Sheffield. So I think adding a body there, was kind of important. Don't know too much about Jalen Myrick. Know he's a Georgia native. But I don't expect him to necessarily challenge for anything more than maybe potentially a practice squad spot if he beats out the likes of Ryan Neal or Jason Stanley. But so I don't think these moves mean anything for the 53-man roster, but they are interesting plays maybe for the practice squad.
I would agree with that. I think Etling has a great shot of being that third quarterback on the practice squad. He'll help out on the scout team just because he's got a little bit more of that athleticism. And the Falcons play a lot of teams that have more athletic, mobile quarterbacks, and thus they don't have to have like someone like Russell Gage or Christian Blake or whoever it would be, some wide receiver having to take those sort of scout team reps. So I think that gives Etling, assuming that he performs adequately over the next 2 games, he should be a pretty good bet to make the practice squad at this point. And the same thing goes with Myrick. I think really I think we both agree that there's like 6 guys at the cornerback spot that are pretty safe bets to make the roster. But then after that point, you don't know who's really the front runner for the practice squad spot. And because guys like Ryan Neal and Jason Stanley haven't necessarily, really jumped out so far in the preseason, that, we get Tevez Calhoun coming back this week. Myrick's got a golden opportunity, and more so than normally at this point in the summer where you would be like, oh, this guy's just a camp body to get them through the next 2 games. And just because we haven't really seen much from the cornerback depth, that was one of the reasons why people got a little bit excited about Ham Cheevers when the Falcons had him for about 3 days. So it's one of those things where I do think Myrick does have a good opportunity to potentially land a practice squad spot if he can come in and, sort of hit the ground running and at least look mildly competent. And, basically if he breaks up one pass, that'll be like one more pass than what we've seen from the rest of the sort of deep backups at that cornerback spot. So, I think you're right in terms of this is really more potential options for the practice squad, and we'll sort of see what these guys can do. I mean, the one thing you'll say about Myrick is he's very fast. He's one of the fastest players in the NFL, ran a 4.28, one of the fastest corners times ever recorded, and was in that 40 yards gold competition on pay-per-view earlier this summer. I don't think he was a finalist or anything, but just being there means that you're really fast. So, that could be something that the Falcons could use, particularly this week, because we know guys like Gage and Sheffield, we'll talk about this later, but those guys are going to be out of the lineup this week, and the Falcons, it's just be a golden opportunity for someone like Myrick if he can come in and maybe be a gunner on the punt team, and maybe showcase that speed and be like, okay, well, maybe he didn't make enough plays on defense, but he's really fast on special teams, and that counts for something.
Yep.
So the other main topic of discussion is the looming possibility. We've been hearing that this move is looming for 5 months. I think March was the first time we heard something about this, that it's a Julio Jones deal is imminent. But now we know, according to Zach Klein, local Falcons reporter, that Julio's agent, Jimmy Sexton, is in Atlanta this week, which is a positive sign if you think that it's going to be the finalization of that extension that Julio will get. So, whether it's in the next 24 hours or next 72 hours, it does seem likely that by the next time we do this show, next week, we may be talking about the details and parameters of a new Julio Jones contract. So I'm curious, Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you'd certainly think it's a good sign to potentially get done this week. I tweeted out that, the last time Julio Jones got a contract extension, it fell on the Falcons dress rehearsal preseason game back in 2015. So maybe there's a little deja vu in Atlanta's future because, obviously the dress rehearsal game's on tap for this Thursday. So, yeah, I'm hopeful. I remain hopeful that it, by at least week 1 of the regular season, this will get done. So maybe not necessarily it's a foregone conclusion this week just because Jimmy Sexton's in town, but I certainly think we're getting close to that point, and I remain hopeful that it'll get done by, like I said, week 1 of the regular season.
Yeah. I've been pretty confident that would be the case. It seemed like maybe a week or two ago that it seemed like it was also imminent, but we'll just sort of have to wait and see.
Yeah, I guess we can talk about it later, but I feel like if that didn't happen, you almost wonder if it's going to get tabled again for another year, which, again, I don't think that would be a great PR strategy. I mean, they've gotten some deals done during the season, but that's not typically how they like to do business for the most part.
Yeah, I would be surprised. I would be very surprised if we're, we get to September 8th and a deal hasn't been done.
Yeah.
Like, to me, September 7th would probably be like the last day,
right?
That I would really think that wouldn't get done. It just would seem weird to me that, given essentially 12 months of sort of discussions that have been ongoing, that they, and one of the things we've talked about previously is like relative to like the Grady Jarrett deal and some of these other deals, it seems like you kind of know exactly what Julio Jones sort of where his market is. So it's one of those things where it's like it'll be a little weird, but we'll just have to wait and see. Let's talk a little bit about the injuries that the Falcons are going to be dealing with this upcoming week. In the Redskins game, Dan Quinn already basically ruled out 7 players for this upcoming Thursday. These guys have been dealing with injuries for the most part since last week. Caleb McGarry is back doing some sideline work, individual drills. It doesn't necessarily indicate that he's ahead of schedule as far as his rehab, I guess you could call it, from his the surgery that he had or the procedure that he had earlier this month with his heart condition. But we'll have to sort of see it. Basically, our timetable is whenever he goes off of blood thinners, then there be a couple of days where then he'll be ready to go. And we just have to wait and see at what point when those blood thinners come off. But in other injury news, we have Demonte Casey, who's dealing with a rib injury, Russell Gage, hip injury, Kendall Sheffield, hamstring injury. All those guys were injured during the course of the Jets game last week. They're not expected to play. Ty Sambrailo is dealing with the shoulder injuries, missed the last couple of days of practice. I don't think Dan Quinn officially ruled him out, but it seems very unlikely that he's going to play. Tyler Davison is another player that is dealing with a calf strain. He's been also ruled out, and I feel like I'm forgetting another. Oh, Foye Olakun dealing with an oblique muscle. He's been out, and of course, Julio Jones and Deion Jones are not going to play, which we knew Julio Jones was. There was seemed like a 98% chance that Deion Jones wasn't going to play this preseason, but the Falcons just didn't officially say so, like they did earlier this month with Julio. Yeah, we know Deion Jones is also going to miss time again this week against the Redskins. And for both of the Jones boys, the Falcons are more focused on getting those guys ready for week one. And I think for a lot of these guys with like Casey Gage, Sambrailo, Sheffield, and even Olakun, the focus now is getting those guys healthy for week one, where it's going to matter, not necessarily seeing these guys for the rest of the preseason. But Matt, what are your thoughts on, these injuries and maybe other players that could potentially be stepping up into the void this upcoming week, given this opportunity?
Yeah, I think to start with McGarry and the update on him, Dan Quinn's original comments to me made it seem like he wasn't going to be in individual drills at this point in the process. I thought, it was going to be walkthroughs for a week, then maybe individual drills. And we're already, on Monday he was seen doing individual drills. So the next step of the process then is working in team drills. So I think that's somewhat encouraging. I think to me that, he might now avoid the PUP list or the NFI list, depending on how they want to categorize it. It's the same thing. And, it would come with it a 6-week mandatory absence. It does look like to me we might luck out and he doesn't have to go on that list. So, now I'm starting to think, when's the earliest we might see him? I don't necessarily believe we'll see him at all in the preseason. And I don't think, you're going to try to insert him in the lineup week 1 or week 2. I think really for me, the timetable now is that week 3 matchup against the Colts is, I think, the earliest we might potentially see him in a regular season game or any game in general. At that point, we're talking September 20th, and the procedure originally happened the start of August. So then we're talking like 7 weeks. So I think that's somewhat reasonable. So, that's, the part of the calendar where I'd circle for right now for McGarry. I mean, the team will continue to give us updates, but I think it is encouraging that he is doing the individual drills, and hopefully the team drills maybe follow, by that final week before the regular season starts. As for some of the other guys, I do agree. I think we've probably seen the last of Demonte Casey, Russell Gage, but, potentially even Ty Sambrailo, in the preseason, also Julio Jones, Deion Jones, we're not going to see them. So because of guys like Casey and Gage being out, it's definitely an opportunity, for someone like Chris Cooper, who, stepped up in both Casey and Sheffield's absence. And if Sheffield's out too, longer than Thursday, I mean, Cooper's a guy, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later, but he was a guy I thought, had a good day for him, improved his stock somewhat, because he's the guy that's right after Sheffield as far as the nickel corner spot. So he showed some versatility there in addition to his play at free safety. So he's a guy that certainly has an opportunity to have one last-ditch effort, maybe at the 53-man roster. I think with Ty Sambrailo being out, this is a huge opportunity for Matt Gano, who Dan Quinn has praised throughout the summer in his development. So I'll be very intrigued about him potentially be the starting right tackle on Thursday. And And then some of the other receivers, I think, Olamide Zaccheaus is a guy we've talked about a lot on this show. With Gage being out, he's a guy that should see more time since Gage was kind of, he was the starting receiver with Julio being out the entire preseason. We might see Zaccheaus in that role on Thursday. And he's a guy, too, that Dan Quinn talked about wanting to get him some more return reps in the punt game. So, with these injuries, it's unfortunate because, you do want to see these guys continue to get some reps, especially guys like Gage and Sembrilo and Sheffield. But it's definitely an opportunity to, strengthen your depth and a chance for some of these other guys to steal a roster spot.
Yeah, we just got a comment in the chat about is Garno starting. This week he is. Beyond this week, I think that remains to be seen. But I think there's a chance that if Garno plays exceptionally well against the Redskins, then there's a chance that he may start the season at right tackle, or at least the Falcons need to have a conversation about him possibly starting the season at right tackle. With McGarry, for me, going back to what you said, Matt, like, the timetable always seemed to be like it was going to be like a week 3, week 4 thing. And we'll have to sort of see if that gets accelerated. But at this point in time, I'm not necessarily expecting him to be ready for week 1. I think people should continue to expect him to be ready to go by like week 3, week 4, maybe week 5, based off of that 6 to 8 week timetable. And if we get any updates in the meantime that suggest that he's, coming back sooner, then I think maybe we can push the time frame up. But I wouldn't necessarily read too much into the whole idea of him doing individual drills. I think this is more of a conditioning thing, trying to get him conditioned. It's going to take a couple of weeks for them to get him up to game speed before he's even ready to actually step on the field and start taking some hits. But yeah, piggybacking on some of the other things you said, I do think, these absences do create some opportunities for some guys. And, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the D-tackle depth and sort of what's going on with Tyler Davison later on in the episode. So I don't want to sort of jump the gun there, but let's jump into our conversation from the Jets game and what we have done consistently on the show these last couple of weeks this preseason, and probably will continue to do heading into the regular season, is our sort of 3 up, 3 down segment. You can look at this as a way of guys that have elevated their stock, guys that impressed you, guys that maybe have hurt their stock, or guys that you have some lingering questions about, however you want to turn it. But Matt, who are the 3 guys that have boosted their stock in your eyes?
So I mentioned Chris Cooper just a bit ago. I'll touch on him a little bit more. Again, surprised a little bit to see him be the 3rd guy up in that nickel role, as opposed to maybe someone like Jordan Miller, who had some cross training throughout camp there. And, you could see why, for sure, that, Cooper was getting those snaps. Very reliable tackler. And again, if there's one knock that I've had on Miller that I've seen is, he does need to clean up his tackling a bit. Too many times you see him kind of lunging at the ball carriers. Cooper, that wasn't the case. Showed good form wrapping up. So I think he's definitely someone that helped his stock. Again, in relation to him, I think Sherrod Neesman had another good game, and I don't know if Cooper's going to be able to overtake Neesman for a roster spot. And I think that's really the only avenue for him to make it, is to be that like 4th or 3rd safety, depending on how you look at the rest of the safety depth chart. Because I just don't see, a scenario where they keep Cooper and Neesman and someone like Ishmael and 6 corners as well, which, I feel pretty good about the 6 corners. So, again, if Cooper continues to show out and, maybe Neesman, falls a little bit the next couple games, then maybe we have, more of a roster battle on our hands. But I did think with his snaps, he played well. He was Pro Football Focus graded him as the top Falcons defender. So again, he's looking to get more snaps this coming Thursday with some of these injuries. So he's someone to keep an eye out going forward. Another guy that's making the most of his opportunities, Jaden Graham. With the Falcons shipping Eric Saubert off to New England, there's an opportunity for Jaden Graham to see time and to really, fight for one of those last spots and make the team think about carrying 4 tight ends, or maybe, Graham beats a guy like Logan Paulson, but Graham continues to make plays out there. He was the leading receiver in the game. He saw some work at fullback too, so and did an admirable job there for the limited time that he was there. So if he continues to show that flexibility, continues to show that playmaking ability, the team will have a tough call. Once they try to shrink the roster down to 53 man, Jaden Graham could be one of those last guys that sneaks on, and then the last guy, a guy that's been underrated because, one of the hot names this preseason has been, Brian Hill, and obviously Quadri Allison being a draft pick. He's gotten a lot of attention, but Ito Smith, really shined on Thursday and kind of, made the claim to the world that, hey, I'm the running back too here in Atlanta. Don't forget about me. And, showed, as a ball carrier, showed good vision. And then as a pass catcher, showed some ability that he showed last season as far as making guys miss in the open field. So, I've been saying that, I do like Brian Hill. I do like Quadri Allison. Obviously, both make the team. But I don't think we should worry about a scenario where Ito Smith's not the running back too. I do still think that he's the guy. He's the more complete all-around back. He's very much like Devontae Freeman. So if Devontae Freeman were to go down, I think the Falcons would be in good hands with Ito Smith. So he was another guy. He was the third guy to me that stood out last Thursday.
Yeah, for me, my first guy is a guy that I've been very skeptical of for several months now because I've been hearing a lot of hype about him. And unfortunately, he got injured in this game, but that's Russell Gage. I thought this was really the game where prior to this point, it's like, yeah, he's looked improved, but I think for all the hype that he has gotten, talking about him as he's like the most improved player on the team, talking about him, comparing him to DeMonte Casey last year in terms of, potential breakout candidate, or at least implying that sort of thing. He was a guy that I just kind of was like, yeah, he's better, but I don't get all the hype. And I thought he did a really good job this past week. One of the things I sort of knocked him for is like, yeah, he's beating these third string corners, and it's like it's not that impressive. And for me, it's like, if you're really going to be impressive, you put Calvin Ridley out on the field against third string corners, he's just going to run circles around those guys. And I thought this was really the first game where I saw Russell Gage looking like he was like a significant notch above these third string corners that the Jets have. And now maybe it's the case with the Jets corners are just especially bad. I don't know. I haven't watched enough Jets football to know that. I know they've been particularly thin at the cornerback spot. But, at the bottom line is, he was running circles around some of these guys. He was putting some shakes on these guys, some double moves and whatnot. Particularly on the play where he got hurt, he put a really nice double move on those guys. I still feel like Russell Gage would be better suited being more of a slot receiver than an outside receiver. But that's a conversation that the Falcons will have to have at some point later on, probably after the season, depending on how 2019 goes for him, as well as the rest of the receiver core. But I do like his potential a lot more, today than I did a week ago, in terms of his contribution to the roster. The other player I'm going to highlight is Jermaine Grace. I think Jermaine Grace continues to shine. I think he continues to be the most impressive linebacker not named Deion Jones we haven't seen Deion Jones this preseason, but you know what I mean? To me, he's been the most impressive linebacker that the Falcons have had this preseason. And only Deion Jones is the only player that I think sort of eclipses him in terms of the impression that he makes. Not suggesting that he's better than Devondre Campbell or anything like that, but I've just been very impressed by what Jermaine Grace, and he does sort of Deion Jones-esque, light version of Deion Jones, the 0-calorie version of Deion Jones. He does similar things with his speed and his range and his ability to make plays sideline to sideline. The last person I highlight is just a solid veteran player, not a guy fighting for his roster spot, but to me was the most impressive player on the Falcons defense, made several plays against the Jets, and that was Desmond Trufant. And I know Desmond Trufant gets a lot of flack from certain segments of the fan base for being overrated, for being overpaid, for being all these various things. So, any opportunity I get to highlight Desmond Trufant's positive play and throw it in people's faces, like I'm going to take that opportunity. So that's what I'm doing right now. I think he played really well against the Jets. They were running a lot of crossing routes and whatnot, which are some of the most difficult routes to defend for a cornerback in man coverage. And he was step for step with some, people want to knock the Jets or whatever, but Robbie Anderson and Quincy Enunwa are good quality NFL wide receivers. So that's not easy to do. So the fact that Trufant could make some plays against some of those guys, I think, was very impressive.
Yeah, as far as stock down guys, so obviously I think we have to talk about the offensive line here. That was one of the notable storylines of the game. And usually, I want to preface with this list, I typically pick players that, either have something to lose, and in this case, it would be have something to lose, or in the stock boosted, have something to gain. So, I thought the offensive line in general, most of them had their flaws. Alex Mack might have been the only one that I didn't really notice make any errors, but I thought, across the board, Jake Matthews had a rough outing. Jamon Brown had his struggles at times. Chris Lindstrom struggled, but the guy I'm going to put on this list, because I don't think the other three players really had a lot to lose, or didn't perform as poorly to lose their spot, is Ty Sombrello. I didn't watch the game live like everyone else did, and I saw people really dig into Ty Sombrello's play. And when I went back and watched it last night, obviously there was 3 plays to me where he looked like he had no business being on the field, and was, steamrolled by guys, even average offensive linemen shouldn't be steamrolled by. So again, I think it's worth noting that when you're bad as an offensive lineman, people tend to, again, I think over exaggerate how bad of a performance the player had as a whole. And I think that's kind of a little bit what Ty Sombrello dealt with. Again, he was bad on those plays. He gave up, I believe, the 2 sacks, and 1 was a pressure and a quarterback hit. But for the most part, other than that, he held his own. Some of the other guys were the ones that led to the pressures on Matt Ryan. I do want to point out one thing about Sombrello. I don't know if it was 2, but I know definitely it was 1 offsides call he was able to smartly, draw attention to, and point out to the officials, and then, blow the play dead. So I think, again, a heady play like that is something that deserves a little bit of praise. But again, Ty Sombrello certainly had the most to lose here, because he's still in a roster battle. He hasn't locked it down now. Obviously, the whole Caleb McGarry situation puts that spot a little bit safer on his side. But again, we know with him being out now, Matt Gano has a great opportunity. The coaching staffs continue to praise him. He hasn't had the type of blunders that Ty Sombrello now has on his record this preseason. So there is an opportunity to maybe, Gano can close the gap there. But, unlike you, I don't really think it's necessarily in play for week 1. I do think Sombrello is likely to be the week 1 starter. And, again, I'm not going to lose total faith in the guy just because of 1 preseason outing against a defense that, again, threw a lot at the Falcons, and, a team that didn't, Falcons didn't game plan for that. But enough about the offensive line. A couple other guys that I thought their stock dropped. Bruce Carter was someone you mentioned in this category last week, and I was kind of keeping a close eye on him when I rewatched, and I can definitely see what you're seeing there. There was 2 particular plays: the touchdown run that Ty Montgomery had, where he bounced it out to the left side. I thought Carter wasn't decisive enough. He wasn't making that instinctive read that we see time and time again from a guy like Deion Jones, or something we're even seeing from Jermaine Grace, to hit that gap, to make that read, and to make the tackle. Carter didn't do it on that play. That allowed Montgomery to bounce to the outside. And then there was another big run. I don't know if it was Cannon or Montgomery again, but there was like an 18-yard run later in the game where, again, I just think Carter wasn't decisive enough hitting that hole, making that read from the middle linebacker spot. The announcer kind of credited Tack McKinley for not having a good run fit. And, that's probably true, but I think Carter did have an opportunity. If he was a little quicker and read the play quicker, could have made the play and, held it to a minimal gain. So again, I'm not sure necessarily if he has anything to lose, because we've consistently seen him in that, 3rd or 4th linebacker spot now. So I still tend to think his roster spot's safe. But again, if a guy like Jermaine Grace, who continues to make plays, maybe he ends up pushing Bruce Carter out the window, because, we did see Duke Riley back, and Duke Riley came on in the second team, shortly before Jermaine Grace, and he wasn't on the field long, but he was a guy that I did see some instinctive playing out of him that we didn't see last year out of him. So again, maybe Carter's job isn't safe, and they're trying to get him some looks to really evaluate him to see whether they want him on this team in 2019. And then finally the last guy is Deidrin Senat, which I think I want to have a longer discussion with you about this. But Deidrin Senat's a guy who, when we had Jason on the show a couple weeks ago, Jason Butt, he had mentioned that kind of Deidrin Senat's roster spot isn't as safe as we might have once thought. And there's more and more evidence that's coming out that's pointing to that. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat was the second group defensive lineman that came on the field. Deidrin Senat wasn't a part of that. It was Jacob Tuiata Mariner. It was Justin Zimmer in the middle, and John Kaminsky at the strong side defensive end. Senat then soon after rotated in and has continued to see work next to Zimmer as a 3 tech, which, I know you and I think both agree isn't his best role on this team. I think he's a 1 tech through and through, and maybe it's the lack of flexibility that's hurting him at this point. But again, watching him, I don't see, a whole lot wrong with his play. Like, I don't see him getting pushed around too much. There's a time here and there, and I think we could say that about, all the defensive linemen on the Falcons front. But again, for whatever reason, whether it is the lack of flexibility or it is, the lack of development in his pass rush, but Deidrin Senat is slowly falling out of favor, and there's really, a question and a concern of mine whether he might be on the roster bubble and might not make the 53-man roster. So for that reason and that reason alone, he's my third and final guy that, I think stock dropped this past week.
Well, Matt, first, before I get into my 3 guys down, is your back okay? Because you really bent over backwards to put a positive spin on that Tyson Bravo.
Well, listen, again, like I said, I think when guys are bad, it really gets highlighted. But you can go and look at the timeline, on my timeline where I tweeted out Warren Sharp showing all 18 of Matt Ryan's dropbacks. Tyson Braylow wasn't the victim on all 18 of those, and that's what Twitter kind of made it seem, at least when I was kind of following along a little bit on Thursday night. So again, I do agree he was not great. Pro Football Focus made that pretty clear in their grade. They gave him like a 19 overall grade, which is dreadful. But again, who knows? I don't know exactly their process and how they grade. I know they only credit him for 2 pressures. I would have given him 3. But again, I want to make it clear. I do think he lost. His stock definitely did drop. There is a question at right tackle, but Jake Matthews also had a terrible performance. I know there's a larger sample size with Jake Matthews. He's a Pro Bowler, but where's the hate on Jake Matthews for his performance? Because I thought he was just as bad. Maybe it didn't look as bad as far as like getting steamrolled and stuff, but Jake Matthews was pushed back into Matt Ryan's lap quite a few times, committed a few holding calls. But yeah, I mean, me, I still think Tyson Braylow can at least hold down the fort for the first couple of weeks before McGarry really gets going with this thing. And so that's why, I'm going to caution fans to not freak out if he's the starting right tackle.
Okay. I just,
like, again, if we see a couple more performances like this Thursday's matchup against Ryan Kerrigan is going to be huge, but unfortunately, we're not going to get to see him. So again, we can't evaluate it, but I need to see more consistently week in and week out him getting destroyed for me to like, all right, yeah, let's ditch this plan. That's how I'm at.
Look, I'm not. I don't want to make this into a 15-minute thing. I just want to sit here and say, like,
yeah,
if you look at his career, you got many weeks of him getting destroyed, but apparently
we didn't get that last year though.
We got 3 good games from Tyson Braylow, and apparently his career didn't begin until December of 2018 in a lot of people's eyes. And that's what's been fascinating to me.
We've talked about it on this show. It sometimes takes offensive linemen a bit to develop. Like it sometimes doesn't happen overnight where you can just, like, again, I also think there's injuries in Denver that contributed to some of his poor play, and he just needed a new spot. And, Atlanta offered him that. And again, he didn't see much time in 2017. He was hurt for a little bit. We didn't see great performances out of 2017, but his stock was definitely moving in the right direction at the end of 2018. So again, I don't blame the team for taking a look at that. He's still young. He's entering the prime now of his career. Why not take a chance on that as a bridge to your potential rookie right tackle?
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. It's just been interesting to me, sort of how we're sitting here, trying to point out the positives of Ty Sambrailo when it's just like, okay, I mean, sure, that's that's all I'm saying. Okay, so my 3 down. I'm going to go with my guy, Justin Hardy. He is not making a strong case for all the support I have given him over the years, dropping a very easy pass in the end zone. I'm not a person that believes drops are as big a deal as people make them out to be, but like there's no excuse for that. That's just laziness. That's just poor concentration. And, it opens the door for the Falcons to look harder at players like Christian Blake, at players like Olamide Zaccheaus. So, for that reason alone, he's like, 2 weeks ago, I'd been like, yeah, there's like a 2% chance that the Falcons cut Justin Hardy. But, after that drop, now I'd probably say like, yeah, it might be closer to 20% chance that they would cut Justin Hardy, which may not seem as high as maybe other people would put it, but like is a significant difference in my eyes. So his stock is down. Of course, I got to go with Giorgio Tavecchio. Just got to slander Giorgio Tavecchio. Any non-Matt Bryant kicker that plays for the Falcons is not going to get much love from me. No, I don't think Tavecchio's performance is that alarming, but certainly, when you're filling the shoes of a veteran, you can't really afford, at least from a fan perspective, maybe the coaches feel differently, but you can't really, afford to stall, to get off to a slow start when you're filling the shoes of a legend. Particularly when that legend, it's not as if this was a situation where Matt Bryant was on the downswing of his career. He made 95% of his kicks last year. Like, it's like he was a guy that was still going strong. I know people will point out the injuries and whatnot, but whatever. The last guy I'll point out is Logan Paulson. You mentioned Jaden Graham. At this point in time, I think Jaden Graham's going to make the team over Logan Paulson. I just, I think it's nothing against Paulson. I just think Graham's ability to play that fullback, a role that he's pretty consistently played in the second halves of all these preseason games, his value as a pass catcher, his value as a blocker, the value that he brings to the special teams. I think Graham checks all the boxes that if you're looking for a third tight end that can, I'm not expecting him to, like in the event of an Austin Hooper injury, be able to step in and give you valuable starting reps there. But certainly a guy that can sort of be that complementary player in the same mold as a Luke Stalker and give you a viable option so that if you do wind up not keeping a fullback on this roster, which I don't think the Falcons will do, I think they will decide to part ways with Ricky Ortiz. Having an extra body there in the Jaden Graham that can maybe give you some reps there. If Stocker isn't healthy or isn't playing particularly well, I think gives you a lot more value. So for me, Paulson is a guy that I think he's good at what he's good at. He's a capable blocker, but outside of that, he doesn't really bring a whole lot else to the table. And I think a younger player like a Jaden Graham brings potentially a lot more things and checks a lot more boxes. So I feel like Paulson's stock is down at this point. So let's move on and let's talk about the thing that Matt brought up earlier before we get into the Redskins game. And let's talk about Dejan Senat. Let's talk about the fact that he has consistently been the sort of the third string nose tackle behind Justin Zimmer. And with Rashid Hageman coming back this week, potentially could be even pushed further down the depth chart. And as Matt alluded to, there has been various media members, including Jason Butt, including D-Led, and others that have suggested that Senat is on the bubble, that Senat is potentially on the outside looking in as far as this roster goes. For me, at least, if that is the case, and I personally don't think it is the case, but I also didn't think that Eric Stolbert was in danger. I also didn't think Justin Hardy was in danger. I also didn't think Duke Riley was in danger going into the summer. And so far, some of those expectations and predictions have been proven false. So maybe you can take my opinion with a grain of salt. But if it is the case that Dejan Sanat is on the bubble, I think that would be a major mistake for the Falcons to basically give up on a second year player that has performed reasonably well, not only during his rookie season when he got the opportunities, and has, as Matt pointed out, even though he's working with the third string, he's played well when he's gotten on the field. He's played well when he's been asked to play that one technique role. And I think sort of just punting on him just because Tyler Davidson is better or potentially Justin Zimmer is better in the coaching's eyes and saying like, oh, we're just going to get rid of this guy um, because he's the third best nose tackle on our team, and we don't need more than two or whatever the case may be. I just think would be a mistake, particularly if it leads, if we're getting rid of Duke of Dejan Sanat and keeping a player like a Bruce Carter or a Dejan Sanat or a Logan Paulson or Ricky Ortiz or Marcus Green and some of these guys that I don't think really have done much of anything to earn a roster spot if you're getting my honest opinion. And maybe I've heard other people suggest maybe the possibility that the Falcons would try to shop him to try to get some return on that investment, but you're not going to get a third round pick back. I can guarantee you that. You'll probably at best get a seventh round pick or something like that. So for me, like, even though there are all these signs and red flags, I'm just I guess I'll continue to be in denial and not believe that the Falcons are going to cut a good player just because, they happen to have a really deep D line rotation. Like, that's a good problem to have.
Right.
And if that means, in my eyes, keeping 10 or 11 D linemen this year, then so be it. Like, do you need more than, five linebackers? Do you need more than, three tight ends? Do you need, like, to me, it's one of those things where it's like you can afford to make some sacrifices at some other positions in order so that you can keep a deeper D line rotation. But I'm curious, Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. And until it happens, I'm very skeptical as well because we've seen early round draft picks and Duke Riley's the first that comes to mind struggle, and they've retained them longer than what they potentially may or may not do with Dejan Sanat here. So, I find it hard to believe that they would give up on a third round pick after 1 year, especially one that I think has shown, things on the field that some of these other guys that they've kept longer haven't. And, you talk about keeping 10 or potentially I've done, projections where they can maybe keep 11 defense linemen. I mean, if you're running this 5-2 front like they've shown throughout the summer, I think keeping more D linemen as opposed to linebackers or maybe another skill position on offense, I think makes a lot of sense. And again, Tyler Davidson's only signed to a 1-year contract. Now, he's someone that when he did sign, there was a report, I believe it was Jordan Schultz, that said they're very much interested in a long-term deal, but that doesn't mean they'll come to terms. I mean, Davidson could show enough to one team where they outbid the Falcons, who, will likely be another cap-strapped year next year in free agency. So keeping Sanat around, who, is under contract for these next 3 seasons, who I think, again, if you take the time to develop him, can be, and, I had expected coming into the season would be the starting nose tackle, and Davison would be fighting for that spot. But now that's not the case. So, yeah, I still have my doubts. I get, some of the reasons why various media outlets are saying it. And, obviously the depth chart's speaking to it a little bit. But, I was just looking to see whether Justin Zimmer, because, again, Justin Zimmer was on the practice squad last year. If you still want to hold on to him because you like what you see from him and he's only 26, 27 years old, I I believe he might have one more year of practice squad eligibility, and that's a guy that I think, it's less of a risk to put him on there than it is Dejan Sanat because, if you put Sanat on there, there's no chance he's going to last. He's not even going to. I mean, they're going to cut him, and he won't even clear waivers, so you don't even have the opportunity, in my opinion, to put him on the practice squad. So again, like you mentioned, if you want to get something for him, the best you're probably going to do is a 6th or 7th round pick. I just think that's a complete waste. And I hope, these reports aren't true, but for me, this is the biggest storyline heading into this Thursday dress rehearsal game, because with Davison likely going to be out with this calf strain, there's a big opportunity here at nose tackle to, for someone to assert themselves as the backup. And with Rashid Hagman coming back, he only had a couple snaps in that Hall of Fame game, but he showed some stuff, showed some strength there. And he's a guy that has a little bit more versatility to play along the defensive line than Sanat does. So, it makes me wonder how much of Hagman's signing had to do with, continuing to push Sanat, I guess. Because again, you saw that them bringing in two guys at that position. That's my thought process here, is that's what the Hagman signing had to do with. And again, he's going to be one, and that whole position in general is one I had my eye on, on Thursday, because I think that's, one of the unanswered questions that I still have on this roster is who's that ninth D lineman? Because, the Athletic posted their latest projection on Friday, and they only had 8 D linemen, and guys like Zimmer and Sanat and Hagman were on the bubble. So those 3 guys are probably the front runners if they did carry 9 for that spot.
Yeah, I mean, for me at this point in time, I would be surprised if the Falcons didn't carry at least 10. To me, the question is, I think we know who the 8 are.
Right.
The question is Sanat the ninth? Is Zimmer the ninth? Is Hageman potentially the ninth? And that's one of the reasons why I'm like, I think they could carry 11, at least for my eyes. But like, one of the things that you mentioned that got me thinking is like, you look at, Davison being on a 1-year contract, and yeah, there's I think a better than average chance that the Falcons will find a way to get a deal done with him after the season. I thought that when we signed him, that was like, okay, this is a 1-year sort of rental. And then, if he plays well, if he plays like the usual Tyler Davison, he'll get like a 3 or 4 year contract next year or something like that. But I think, having depth behind him, like, again, I don't think it's a crime that Deidre Sanat is quote unquote just a backup nose tackle, if that's what he wants it being. And I think when you look at the rest of this D-line group, when you look at guys like Alan Bailey, you look at guys like Crawford and Claiborne that are on the wrong side of 30. You look at a guy like Hageman, who has yet to show that he's necessarily a guy that's trustworthy at this point, although I agree 100% with you that I think he was impressive for the very limited action that we saw against the Broncos. But it's one of those things where it's like, to me, just giving up on a 25-year-old D tackle that looks like he could be a valuable depth piece at the very least, and if you continue to develop him over the next year or two, could potentially turn into a capable starter in the same mold that a guy like Tyler Davison is. That to me is not something that you just want to give up on for what, just so you can keep a 7th wide receiver, that's not going to play. Like, what's that for? So that you can keep, again, not to bash Bruce Carter, because again, as I said last week, I think he did some positive stuff for the team last year. But like, what's the value of Bruce Carter? Like, you're going to sit there and say like, no, we want to give up on a potential starting D tackle in 2021 so that we can have Bruce Carter for 1 year and then move on from him, next year or something. Like, I don't know. Just like, to me, that would be a mistake. And, it wouldn't be the first time that the Falcons made a roster move that I didn't agree with. And it certainly won't be the last if that was to occur. But it is one of those things where I feel like it just wouldn't make a lot of sense. Again, a lot of it is just because when he's been on the field, he's performed well. Thought I've looked at him and I've watched him and I've been like, this is solid. Like, this is exactly what you are expecting. I don't know what else you're expecting from him.
And I think you're looking at it from the defensive standpoint of like, who stays, who goes. But I think, you can keep Carter, you can keep Riley, you can keep Grace. I really think it comes down to what happens on the offensive side of the ball, as far as, are they really serious about keeping 7 wide receivers? Do we see 5 running backs because Kenyon Barner, the team is committed to Kenyon Barner because he's been the best return guy? Like, that's why I've been, stressing the fact that this return battle really does, set a ripple effect into motion if in fact Marcus Green can't lock it down. Because I don't necessarily see them moving on from, a draft pick after 1 year. They haven't done it in the Dan Quinn era, at least. I guess Jake Rogers might have been the only one. Because
Akeem King, I don't
did,
think
did he,
initially made the
he
roster. I
didn't
think
make it. Okay,
he was on
and
the
those are
practice
both
squad and they
seventh
brought him
round
up.
picks. Green was a guy again. I think they had liked for a while, and I don't think they'd give up on him based on the fact that he was a top 30 visitor and all this. So at the very least, I think he's secure for 1 year in Atlanta. So again, I think if there's a fourth tight end or if there's a seventh receiver or a fifth running back, that's where things become dicey as far as the D line and potentially phasing, one of these guys who, in Sanat, who I think shouldn't get phased out. But again, I think we kind of have the 8 that are going to dress on game day. And even if Sanat was on the, on the 53-man roster, he's not likely to play. So, maybe in that point, they're not ready to stash him, but that would go against everything they stand for as far as the plan D and all that. So again, I'm not really concerned until I see it happen. I still think it's way too early to write him off. But again, based on what we've seen, it's certainly something I'm still keeping my eye on because I think it's one of the unanswered questions.
Well, one of the things I talked about, and you mentioned it, is the return battle. I've been complaining for months that the
Right.
Falcons are wasting a roster spot on a return specialist. Just let Ito Smith and Kendall Sheffield or just find somebody else that has another role on your team do it. Like again, they did that last year with Justin Hardy and Marvin Hall, and obviously Hardy did not perform well. But to me, the issue the Falcons made last summer wasn't that they handled their return battle perfectly. They just picked the wrong guy. That's all it was. And their lesson that they learned from that was like, oh, we need to have a guy that can do this job. And again, there's nothing against Marcus Green. I think he's a fine player. I think in another city that had less wide receiver depth, that had less running back depth, that had less D line depth, Marcus Green would be perfectly fine taking up a roster. If this was 3 years ago when the Falcons had less talented players at those spots than they do now, wouldn't have a problem with Marcus Green making the team. But now, these are the ramifications. Whether it's a Deidre Sanat, whether it's a Justin Zimmer, whether it's a Jermaine Grace, whoever it is, I feel like the Falcons, if they're insistent on keeping a player like a Kenyon Barner, like a Marcus Green, that's only going to return kicks and do nothing else to this team, they're going to lose another valuable player on offense or on defense. And the only way that is made up is if Barner, Green, or whoever winds up being one of the best return specialists in the league. Now, maybe that happens. If that happens, great. But to me, you kind of got to be Devin Hester to earn that return specialist only job. If you're not that good, then what are you bringing to the table? And even Devin Hester played offense. He was the number 2, number 3 receiver in Chicago and was the number 4 receiver here in Atlanta. So even when Devin Hester wasn't being Devin Hester, he was still contributing to this team. And I look at a player like Marcus Green or Kenyon Barner, and again, I think they're perfectly fine, capable players that could find a spot in this league. But I just think the Falcons have moved past that and evolved past that and just have too many talented players that they're just going to let go just so they can keep a spot open for what, in all likelihood, I don't know, is going to be a pretty average return specialist. So I look, I'm getting myself worked up into this before it happens. So as long as it doesn't happen, I'm like you, I'm going to pump the brakes on overreacting to this, but these are the sort of ripple effects that happen when, to me, you're wasting a roster spot on a guy that only does one thing.
No, you're right. And I mean, that's why if a surprise cut like Marcus Green were to happen, I wouldn't be upset about it. I just think they've invested so much time with him at that return battle and the draft pick that I don't necessarily see it happening. I mean, how would you feel if they cut Marcus Green, kept Kenyon Barner? Is it still the same thing, or at least it's opening up?
I mean, at least in theory,
position.
Kenyon Barner can play running back. The problem is the Falcons have 4 better running backs than him, so he'll never play. But at least in theory, I guess the key difference is we're not really seeing Marcus Green get much of any opportunities on offense.
Right.
We're not really seeing Marcus Green, on punt coverage units or kickoff coverage units. At least Kenyon Barner in his previous stops prior to Atlanta was like a gunner on punt teams, was covering kicks and whatnot. So Kenyon Barner, at least on paper, can do more things than what Marcus Green can do, at least at this point in time. So I would feel like 5% better about keeping Kenyon Barner than I would Marcus Green. But still, at the end of the day, I think you're winding up keeping a player that just does one thing, and if he doesn't do that one thing really well, like it goes back to Tavecchio or Bosher or Josh Harris. It's one of the reasons why people had questions about Bosher last season, where he wasn't punting particularly well, which is true. He picked it up in the second half of the season, but if he's not punting well, then okay, Matt Bosher holding is not going to get you paid, $2-3 million. Giorgio Tavecchio, if you're not making kicks from, if you can only make kicks inside 45 yards, like, I'm sorry, guy, you got to go. Like that's not unacceptable, particularly kicking here in Atlanta. Not just because of Matt Bryant, but you're kicking in probably the easiest venue to kick in. One field goal got missed in the entire Mercedes-Benz Stadium all of last season, and it was the Super Bowl. That was the only kick that was missed in the stadium. So it's like you have no excuse to not be good. And so it's just one of those things. Like if you do one thing, you got to do it well. If you're not doing it well, then you got to go. I'm sorry. It's the bottom line.
Yep.
All right. Let's talk about this Redskins game. And the big question, all eyes are going to be on the offensive line coming off of the heels of that Jets game. And we'll get to see James Carpenter get his first action of 2019, and maybe potentially push, Jamon Brown for that left guard position that, due to Carpenter's absence, has been mostly unchallenged so far. And we'll sort of see if Carpenter can sort of usurp Brown in a lot of ways. And as you mentioned, I don't think Brown was, outside of a couple of plays, was particularly bad against the Jets, but certainly the doors cracked for Carpenter to sort of sneak in. And, unlike you, I think the door is at least slightly cracked for Matt Gano, particularly if he goes in and handles Ryan Kerrigan like DeMar Dotson did a couple of weeks ago. I think it's going to be harder for the Falcons to justify keeping Ty Sambrailo, particularly given Gano's upside. But and not keeping him, I'm saying starting him. I think they have to actually at least have a conversation. I'm not sitting there saying that, Gano can come in and win the job. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Sambrailo is pretty likely to be the week one starter, but I don't think it's a lock. That's all I'm saying. So we'll see. Matt, what are your thoughts on sort of this Redskins game and what you got your eye on?
Yeah, and the offensive line is the big thing, and particularly left guard with James Carpenter making his first action of 2019. I think, Jamon Brown hasn't locked down the job by any means, but I don't think he necessarily, hurt himself too much. I think there is a gap that Carpenter is going to have to make up, and we'll see if the final two preseason games is enough to do that. But I am very intrigued to see him for the first time, see how he looks, being that, that's his natural position, whereas, Brown has had to jump over from after a couple of years of being on the right side. So I'm looking at that. Obviously, Matt Gano, it's a great opportunity for him. We talked about it throughout. I think if anything, for me, I think he has a chance to, earn a game day active spot, whereas, we talked about Caleb McGarry, a reasonable timeline being week 3 or week 4. I think with that in mind, he might potentially be inactive then, for the first 2 weeks. So you want to feel comfortable having Gano being, your swing tackle heading into that matchup. And I remember looking back on some of my tweets a couple months ago, I thought that would have been quite the gamble, having Sambrailo be the starter and Gano being the swing. Maybe there's some doubts about, Sambrailo being the right tackle starting, but I think Gano has certainly shown that he can handle NFL competition and showing that he can handle both sides. I mean, I think it's been great that he's been on both the left and the right side this summer, whereas last year I think he was primarily just on the right side. So he's a guy that, again, has benefited from the Plan D being a red shirt all of 2018. And we're seeing the fruits of that labor in 2019. So I'm curious to see how he does. Some of the other things, we mentioned it already as well. I mean, who's going to step up in the absence of KZ, Gage, Kendall Sheffield, Tyler Davidson? I mean, there's some opportunities for some of these guys fighting for one of those last roster spots to potentially make up some ground there. And then, I mentioned this too last week. But we kind of saw a little glimpse of a dress rehearsal, I think, in this past preseason game. I mean, I was surprised to see the starters out there for as long as we did. And there was a couple things I noticed as far as Devondre Campbell. I was curious to see if he was going to get some snaps at that rush outside linebacker spot, which we did end up seeing. Falcons kind of ran a unique like 5-1-5 kind of nickel look with Keanu Neal was kind of acting as the nickel linebacker down there, and KZ was in the slot still, and the two boundary corners, Isaiah Oliver and Trufant, and then Rico up top at safety. Curious to see how much we continue to see of that, because I think, again, we've talked about how thin the Falcons might be at that true edge spot. But if Campbell continues to see snaps there, then I think you have four guys with him, Claiborne, Tack McKinley, and Vic Beasley that will be called upon and relied upon. I mean, we saw another thing I saw in the game this past week was Alan Bailey was being a true defensive end, not necessarily just the strong side defensive end in base. I don't know how much I like of that. He's not necessarily the run the arc type of pass rusher from the outside that you expect there, and I think he might be better than I think it's clear he could be better than Derek Shelby, because everyone knows my opinion on Derek Shelby in that role, but it's not necessarily something I want to see too much from him. I'd rather see Campbell rushing from the outside, I'd rather see McKinley and Claiborne and Beasley obviously from that spot. But that was one of the other things I noticed, and I'm continuing to monitor how some of the starters get inserted in this new base lineup. Again, I mentioned Duke Riley earlier. He came in with the linebackers right after Carter and Campbell, but before Grace. So I'm going to be looking at him. He didn't seem to have a lot of snaps based on my view. But what I did see, he did stand out at times. So again, great opportunity for him to continue to try to hold on for that roster spot. He was definitely a fixture on special teams, so that's definitely going in his favor. So while I did say on previous shows that I had thought, he had maybe lost his spot already on this 53-man roster, last Thursday kind of made me have a little bit of pause with that. So I'm going to continue to monitor him and see where he's at. But yeah, as far as the matchups go, as I said before, I don't really care a whole bunch. I am concerned how the offensive line holds up against a stout Redskins defensive line. But other than that, matchups wise, nothing really jumps out at me, or nothing I'm really too interested in focusing on.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I think we'll have to sort of see what happens this upcoming week with the dress rehearsal and the starters. And, as is usually the case for this dress rehearsal game, if the offense and or defense play well, people will be like, oh, we're going to the Super Bowl. And if they play poorly, then we'll be like, we're going 0-16. It's the way it goes. So we'll just have to see sort of what the Falcons have in store for the Redskins this upcoming week. Historically speaking, the dress rehearsal games don't necessarily tend to go in the Falcons' way in terms of excellent performances. So I'm eager to see sort of if they buck the trend this year.
Yeah.
But we did get a question in the chat from Baller D. Brian, do we have that queued up about the kick returner? I just wanted to go back and revisit that real quickly. Yeah, no, I mean, my preference is they put like Ito Smith or Kendall Sheffield or Isaiah Oliver or whatever the case may be. Take a guy that does something already for your team and let him return kicks. Calvin Ridley. Like, I was all for Calvin Ridley returning kicks last year. So that's sort of my preference. I just think you look around the league, most teams in the league have figured this out. You see a lot of star players, star receivers that are punt returners. You see a lot of teams that have, basically you can argue that kickoffs don't really matter because it's all just going to be touchbacks anyway. Like 80% of them are going to be touchbacks. So it's like, you just need a guy that can go out there, catch the ball, and not fumble. That's Ito Smith. And then it's really about who you put as your punt returner. And, Isaiah Oliver was a good returner in college. I think Sheffield has shown abilities. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten opportunities to see him return punts. And I think all the reps and all the time that the energy the Falcons have put in to Marcus Green and Kenyon Barton, going back to what Matt said, I think that he's absolutely right. The team definitely wants Marcus Green to win this job. and they're going to give him every opportunity to win this job, and he'll probably wind up winning the job. But I just think from a roster building standpoint, what's the point? Like, why do you have a guy specifically that can do that job if he's not going to do it well? Then, if you're just getting replacement level play, then what's wrong with having a replacement level player there? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough that you have to devote, I think, 3 roster spots to purely specialists, and I think that's why you see coaches. Dan Quinn's been one that's pretty adamant about it, trying to open up the roster and maybe even open up, the game day active roster. And basically, what the Falcons are ending up doing right now is dedicating 4 specialist spots to their 53-man, which, you look around the league, not too many teams are doing that. And we talked about the depth of this roster. They just really can't afford to do it. So, in addition to some of the names you mentioned, I think another one, Russell Gage, is one that I've always thought could potentially do that. He showed some, run after the catch ability this preseason already, which I think has been one of the improvements of his game. But yeah, I mean, one of those guys that we had talked about there, I'd be all for. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's where we're heading.
Now, we got a quick question before we jump into the mailbag from Lonnie Gums. Will Sean Harlow snaps the center? Sounds like he is. I've been waiting for it. Been waiting a year for it. So I hope he doesn't let me down this week against the Redskins and gets his butt kicked by Daron Payne and whoever else that the Falcons put out, or the Redskins put out there in those tackle spot. Matt, what are your thoughts on Harlow playing center?
I didn't even know. Is that a new thing like this week, or did he see?
Yeah,
time
Dan
there?
Quinn indicated that he's going to start getting some snaps at center this week.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think that's probably the clearest path for him to potentially, make the team, or at least be, a practice squad body that is worth keeping around for. Because I think, as far as guard goes, he hasn't really showed that he can handle that. And again, with center being a question for the future, with Wes Schweitzer being a free agent after the season, and Alex Mack obviously entering the twilight of his career, I think, why not try at least see what you can have from him, and being that he's a former 4th-round pick a couple years ago, it doesn't hurt to try that out and see if there's anything there.
Yeah, and he's probably not going to make the team. I think that's
no,
we're all
absolutely.
pretty
Yeah,
sure
I misspoke there.
But yeah, but if he can, if him being a center means that he can make the practice squad, doesn't hurt you to try, basically, at this point, to see if he can earn a spot. Matt, do you want to announce the contest winner, or do you want to get into some of these mailbag questions first?
I mean, we could do that now. So the winner of the second giveaway, exclusive Hall of Fame towel with all of the inductees on it, goes to Lee at Fan since 1988. So again, appreciate everyone for participating. Maybe we'll do a couple more of these throughout the season, but the winner goes to Lee at Fan since 1988. So we'll probably send that out this week, and hopefully Zach Caruso has already received the visor from last week. But so that's that.
Our mailbag question comes from Falcons fan MVP at Ryan2Jones on Twitter. He asks, if Tavecchio turns out to be a liability, do you think there is a realistic chance Matt Bryant will be given another tryout? And why do you think Matt Bryant has not been signed? He said he had a new workout plan to reduce injuries, and he's still a very accurate kicker.
So, I think Dan Quinn kind of spoke on Tavecchio and his thoughts on him today, and kind of, placed his endorsement on him and said he's not concerned. So I don't think it's something that is an imminent danger of happening. We probably won't see a move until the regular season if Tavecchio continues to struggle. I think Tavecchio, much like Sombrilo, is going to be the starter there, at least for the start. And then if he continues to struggle, then maybe there's a quick leash early on. As for why Matt Bryant's not been signed, I think teams are trying to, get cheap with it right now and try to, see if they can avoid signing any big money kickers early on. Because again, there's no reason. I mean, Matt Bryant proved himself at the end of last year that he can still do this, and he seems to be very willing and able. So I just think it's a team philosophy, not valuing the position enough at this stage, and once we get closer, or again, once the regular season starts and these preseason struggles carry through the regular season, I think then is when teams will be like, yeah, we have no choice at this point. We have to make a move, and Bryant's the best on the market.
Yeah, I echo the same sentiments, but I'll just say them in a better way than Matt said them. I think, Tavecchio's not really in danger of being cut until we get a couple of games into the regular season, maybe 2 or 3 games. If he continues to struggle in the regular season, then I think the Falcons will have to sort of revisit. And basically, yeah, Matt Bryant shouldn't pay for the veteran minimum. And right now it's the time of year when teams aren't necessarily going to be willing to spend, 2, 3, or whatever Matt Bryant's asking price is at this point in time for a capable kicker. They're just going to go with cheap veteran minimum guys that they can kick the tires on for the next couple of weeks. But you can bet that if, a team like Chicago, a team like Dallas, or whatever, who was the Minnesota that just made a trade for a kicker?
Yeah.
If those teams, by the time we get to week 1, aren't happy with their current options at the kicker position, you're darn right they'll be like, 2 or 3 million isn't bad to pay for peace of mind. So I do think, there's a pretty decent chance that Matt Bryant could get signed, week 1, week 2 of the regular season. The other factor is, if you're on the roster week 1 of the season, your contract is guaranteed for the rest of the year, your salary at least. So, we could see Matt Bryant still unemployed until someone brings him in week 2 just to avoid having to guarantee his entire contract. So, yeah, I think, the door is probably closed on Matt Bryant coming back to Atlanta. But I certainly think there's a pretty decent opportunity and chance that he'll be suiting up for somebody else. All right. Next question comes from Dirty Bird number 2 at Matt MVP Ryan on Twitter. He asks, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most concerned, how concerned are you about our offensive line?
I'll say a 3. Again, I don't want to let one preseason performance against, a defense that, kind of throws the kitchen sink at their opponents. The Falcons didn't game plan for any of that. They very seldom do game plan for opponents in the preseason. So I'm going to chalk it up more to that. And again, continuing to gel and get the communication down across the line. But if these performances continue to add up, then I think maybe there's a more of a discussion there. I guess my one concern is, just some of the injuries. I mean, again, if Sembrailo's out, I mean, some might say that's a blessing in disguise. But until I see Matt Gano this Thursday night, going against a guy like Ryan Kerrigan or Ryan Anderson, or I'm not sure if Montez Sweat's available due to medicals or anything. Until I see him go up against that level of competition and handle his own, if he's going to be the starter week 1 because Sembrailo's shoulder is really an issue, then maybe that's an issue, but and something I'm concerned about. But as of right now, I think no need to overreact. I still think highly of this unit and its potential, and right now I have it as a 3.
Well, look, I was at a 9 going into the draft. Then the draft brought me down to a 7. Then for most of the summer, I was at like a 6. I don't know if I'll change from a 6 from last week. Like I have a general sense of concern about the Falcons' offensive line overall for the offense, just because they are the most untested group, and we got a bunch of rookies potentially getting plugged in, and we'll have to see how they perform. Chris Lindstrom's got to go up against Linval Joseph week 1. He's got to go up against Fletcher Cox week 2. Like that automatically puts me at a 6. Anytime you got to face those type of D tackles in the league, and you don't have proven players in those roles. So I'm at a 6. But yeah, like I'm not necessarily like I kind of thought the offensive line would have some struggles. I didn't think it was going to be a simple Thanos snap and all of a sudden the Falcons' offensive line woes just went away all of a sudden. So I think it's going to be a work in progress, and we'll just have to sort of see how these guys perform once we get to the regular season. It's it's not going to be an easy start for any of these guys, whether you're Jake Matthews, whether you're Alex Mack, the proven guys, Minnesota, Philadelphia, arguably, are the two D lines that the Falcons have had the most trouble with blocking over the last 4 or 5 years. And you get to face them week 1 and week 2. And it's not going to be easy. And then, it's not going to get that much easier against Houston. I mean, against Indianapolis with guys like Justin Houston and Javal Sheard, and Tennessee with Jarrell Casey and Cameron Wake, and then Houston with J.J. Watt. So it's going to be one of those things where I think the offensive line is going to be a work in progress throughout the entire season. But hopefully it's not going to be so problematic that we're talking about it every single week about, like, there's no way the Falcons can do whatever they want to do offensively because their offensive line is so bad. So a 6 for me. All right, Matt. There you have it with our mailbag questions. We know some of you guys sent in some comments in the chat, and we hope in the future we'll be able to do a little bit more live interaction. We're sort of experimenting with a new platform, as you can see, in the top right-hand corner of your screen, the new platform that we're working with. And we, so far so good. If you guys sort of like this new interactivity where some of your comments can sort of show up on the screen live, let us know, comment below when you watch this video and whatnot. And so that'll be something that we'll take into account when we make a sort of long-term decision if we want to continue with this platform, StreamYard. But so far, so good, at least from my perspective. I'm curious, Matt, what are your thoughts and sort of this interactivity that we have?
Yeah, no, I like it. I like seeing the comments scroll through, and apologize, couldn't get to all of them, but again, just working through it first night, but we'll try to get to most of them, if not all of them, in future. So again, appreciate all the comments that rolled through, and for everyone taking the time out to watch. We appreciate it.
So that's it for our show. If you want to send in your questions or future mailbag questions, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. Send them in to Falcons PFG. That's the show's Twitter handle. Of course, our Twitter handles are on the screen below us. Check out us at profootballcentral.com, where you get all links to our audio version of this podcast and Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to the Pro Football Central YouTube page. Make sure you hit that bell icon, and then also check us out on Facebook at Falcons Central Radio. Give us a like while you're there as well. So we'll be back next week to potentially talk about this Redskins game, talk about potentially a Julio Jones contract, as well as everybody's favorite preseason game, the preseason finale that inevitably goes wrong for the Falcons against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, yeah, guys, check you out later.